The loud emergency alarms rang through the giant Galactic Council building as creatures from every corner of the galaxy rushed inside, their faces filled with pure terror. You could feel the fear in the air like a thick fog that nobody could escape from. Chancellor Vextheri, a tall, crystal-like being who had led the council for over 200 years, stood at the front of the massive chamber. His usually calm blue glow was now flickering red with panic. He raised his sharp, glass-like arm and slammed it down on the speaking platform so hard that the sound echoed through the entire room. "Listen to me, all of you." His voice cracked as he spoke, something that had never happened in all his years of leadership. "What I'm about to tell you will change everything we thought we knew about our galaxy. We are facing something that could wipe out every single one of our civilizations." The massive chamber, which could hold representatives from over 300 different species, fell completely silent. Even the bustling delegation from the Outer Rim, who were famous for never stopping their chattering, went quiet. You could hear a pin drop in that moment. "In the past 30 days, Chancellor Vextheri continued, his voice getting stronger but still shaking, 12 of our most advanced civilizations have gone completely silent. Not just quiet, completely dark. No communications, no signals, no signs of life at all." A wave of worried murmurs spread through the crowd like ripples on water. The Matherian ambassador, a blob-like creature with dozens of eyes, started changing colors rapidly, a clear sign of extreme stress among his people. "But that's not the worst part," the Chancellor said, raising his voice to get everyone's attention back. Their final transmissions before they went dark, they all described the same thing. Shadow beings appear out of nowhere and strike without any warning whatsoever. With a wave of his crystalline hand, a massive holographic screen materialized above the assembly. The image was fuzzy and kept cutting in and out, like an old television with bad reception. But what everyone could see made their blood run cold. Dark ships moved across the screen, vessels so black they seemed to eat the light around them. They weren't like anything anyone had ever seen before. No familiar shapes, no recognizable technology, just smooth, flowing forms that looked more like living shadows than actual spacecraft. Admiral Karaf from the mighty Zolonian Empire pushed himself forward in his floating chair. His people were known across the galaxy as the greatest military strategists, and his 6 bright yellow eyes were the sharpest in the business. He had analyzed more space battles than anyone else alive. "Chancellor, if I may," he said, his voice tight with worry. "My team has been studying this footage for the past week. These ships, they move in ways that should be impossible. Our computers calculate they're traveling at speeds that would tear apart any known material." He pointed one of his 4 arms at the screen, where the dark vessels seemed to dance through space like ghosts. "Watch what happens next. This is from the final battle, recording we received from the Corvani Defense Fleet." The image showed hundreds of bright Corvani warships in perfect battle formation. These weren't small ships. Each one was the size of a small city and packed with enough firepower to destroy planets. They had never lost a battle in their 1,000-year history. But then something impossible happened. One moment the Corvani ships were charging their massive weapons, their hulls glowing bright with energy. The next moment, every single ship went completely dark. No explosions, no visible attacks, no signs of damage. Just darkness. Complete technological shutdown, Admiral Karaf whispered, and you could hear the fear in his voice. Every weapon system, every shield, every engine, all of it shut down at exactly the same time. We've never seen technology that could do this. The chamber exploded into panicked conversations. Species that had been fighting wars against each other for thousands of years suddenly found themselves sitting together, their old conflicts forgotten in the face of this new terror. The proud Draconian Empire delegates were talking quietly with their ancient enemies from the Crystal Worlds. The machine race constructors were sharing data with the Organic Hive Collective. Nobody cared about their old fights anymore. They were all thinking the same thing. If these shadow beings could destroy the mighty Corvani fleet without firing a single shot, what chance did anyone else have? "There's more," Chancellor Vextheri said, and somehow his voice cut through all the noise. "The pattern is getting faster. The first civilization went silent 40 days ago. The second one 35 days ago. The most recent one disappeared just yesterday. They're moving through our galaxy like a plague, and they're speeding up. A reptilian council member stood up, his green scales shimmering with nervous sweat. Chancellor, do we have any idea what they want? Have they made any demands? Any attempt at communication? Nothing, came the grim reply. No messages, no warnings, no negotiations. They simply appear, civilizations vanish, and they move on. It's like they're not even interested in conquest, just complete elimination. The weight of those words settled over everyone like a heavy blanket. This wasn't about territory or resources or power. Whatever these beings were, they seemed focused on one simple goal: making every other species in the galaxy disappear. Chancellor Vextheri looked around the chamber at all the frightened faces staring back at him. Leaders who commanded fleets of millions of ships, beings who controlled entire star systems, creatures with technology that could reshape planets, and all of them were terrified. We have only one choice left, he declared, his crystalline form now glowing with determination instead of fear. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier from every world. We must unite like never before, or we will all face extinction together. Admiral Jake Morrison stretched his arms and took a deep breath as he looked out at the stars from the bridge of his flagship, the Harmony's Edge. After 8 long months of planning, building, and rehearsing, the day had finally arrived. Today would mark the beginning of something that had never been attempted in the history of the galaxy: humanity's first ever intergalactic music festival. Jake wasn't your typical military officer. Sure, he had spent 20 years in the Earth-Space Navy, but his real passion had always been music. He played guitar in a rock band during his college years, and had always dreamed of sharing human music with the universe. When Earth's government approved the cultural exchange program, Jake was the first person to volunteer to lead it. Katie, how are we looking out there? Jake called across the bridge to his communications officer, trying to keep the excitement out of his voice, but failing completely. Lieutenant Katie Walsh looked up from her control panel, her face beaming with the biggest smile Jake had seen in weeks. Katie had been with him since the beginning of this crazy project, and she was just as excited as he was. She had studied alien languages for years and could speak over 30 different galactic dialects. Admiral, I've got amazing news, she said, running her fingers across the holographic displays that showed the status of their entire fleet. All 200 of our concert ships are in perfect position. Every single lighting array is fully charged and ready to create the most incredible light shows these aliens have ever seen. She paused to check another screen, her smile getting even bigger. The sound systems have been calibrated to work in the vacuum of space using our new quantum resonance technology. And you're going to love this. Tom's pyrotechnics team just radioed in. They finished their final safety checks 10 minutes ago, and they're practically jumping out of their skin with excitement. Jake turned to look through the massive view screen that dominated the front wall of the bridge. What he saw still took his breath away, even after months of preparation. Stretching out in front of them was humanity's mobile entertainment fleet. 200 ships that looked like nothing the galaxy had ever seen before. Each vessel had been specially designed and built over the past 2 years. They weren't warships or cargo haulers or exploration craft. They were floating concert halls, each one capable of holding audiences of 50,000 beings. The hulls were covered in millions of tiny holographic projectors that could create three-dimensional light, shows visible from millions of miles away. The sound systems were even more impressive, using breakthrough technology that humanity had developed just for this project. Each ship could project music and sound effects across entire solar systems. They had tested it on Pluto, and people on Earth could hear it clearly, but the real magic was in the design. Each ship looked like a work of art floating through space. Some were shaped like giant musical instruments. There was one that looked like a massive guitar, another like a drum set the size of a small moon. Others had flowing, organic curves that seemed to dance even when they were standing still. "Sir," called out Ensign Bill Chun from his position at the sensor station. Bill was the youngest member of their crew, fresh out of the academy, and his job was to monitor everything happening around their fleet. "I'm picking up some really massive energy signatures approaching our position." Jake's heart started beating faster. This was it, their first contact with an alien audience. For months, they had been sending out invitations across the galaxy, broadcasting on every known frequency, and in every language they could translate. The response had been incredible. Dozens of civilizations had sent back excited replies, promising to attend the opening ceremony. "This is what we've been waiting for, Bill," Jake said, moving closer to the sensor station. "How many ships are we talking about? A few hundred? 1,000? Bill's eyes went wide as he stared at his displays. He started counting, then stopped and started over again. Sir, this is incredible. I'm reading massive fleet formations heading our way. This looks like... Wow, I can't believe this. It looks like about 50,000 ships." Jake's jaw dropped. In his wildest dreams, he hadn't expected a response this big. 50,000? Are you sure about that number? "Yes, sir, and they're all in perfect formation. Look at this coordination. It's like they planned this for months. They're coming in organized groups from different directions, all timed to arrive at exactly the same moment." Katie jumped up from her station, practically bouncing with excitement. "Admiral, this is unbelievable. They really went all out for our opening night. I mean, 50,000 ships? That's like having the entire population of a small planet come to our concert." Jake couldn't stop grinning. This was beyond anything they had hoped for. When they first proposed the idea of an intergalactic music festival, most people on Earth thought they were crazy. Music in space? The critics had said, aliens don't want to hear human songs. They probably don't even understand the concept of entertainment. But Jake and his team knew better. Music was universal. Every civilization they had studied had some form of artistic expression, some way of creating sounds and rhythms that brought their people together. Humans had always been good at making friends through music, and Jake believed the same thing would work on a galactic scale. "Bill, can you get me more details on those ships?" Jake asked, moving to the captain's chair in the center of the bridge. "I want to know what kinds of civilizations we're dealing with here." "They're maintaining standard diplomatic approach patterns," Bill reported, his fingers dancing across his control panel. "Military precision, but non-threatening. It looks like they're treating this like a major state event." Jake nodded approvingly. This was exactly the kind of respect and attention they had hoped for. The fact that these alien civilizations were sending such massive delegations showed how seriously they were taking humanity's cultural outreach. "Katie, open up all communication channels," Jake ordered, settling into his chair and smoothing down his dress uniform. "Let's give our guests the welcome they deserve. This is going to be the greatest show the galaxy has ever seen." Admiral Zethrak stood frozen on the command deck of his flagship, the Galactic Defender, as sweat dripped down his scaled forehead despite the cool air circulating through the bridge. His four-fingered hands gripped the railing so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. Around him, his crew of the galaxy's most experienced warriors, prepared for what they all believed to be the final battle for galactic civilization. The massive view screen in front of them showed the enemy fleet in all its terrifying glory. 200 dark vessels hung in space like black holes that seemed to swallow the light of nearby stars. Zethrak had fought in over 100 battles during his 40-year military career, but he had never seen anything that made his stomach twist with fear like these mysterious ships. "All weapon systems are fully charged and ready to fire, Admiral," reported his weapons officer, Lieutenant Commander Vextal, whose voice trembled despite his best efforts to sound brave. "Energy shields are at maximum power. Every ship in our fleet is locked and loaded." Zethrak nodded grimly. The combined armada behind him represented the greatest military force ever assembled in galactic history. 50,000 warships from 12 different civilizations, each one packed with enough firepower to destroy entire planets. If this massive fleet couldn't stop the shadow beings, nothing could. "Sir," called out his tactical officer from across the bridge, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "The enemy vessels are beginning to move. They're starting some kind of coordinated formation change." Every eye on the bridge turned to the main screen. The dark ships, which had been hovering motionless in space like sleeping predators, suddenly began to shift and move. But something was wrong. Instead of charging forward in an attack formation like any normal military force would do, they were arranging themselves in strange, flowing patterns. "What kind of battle formation is that?" whispered Commander Thylex, Zethrak's second-in-command. "I've studied every known military strategy in the galaxy, and I've never seen anything like it." Then something impossible happened. The hulls of the enemy ships, which had been absorbing light like black sponges, suddenly exploded into brilliant color. Waves of red, blue, green, and gold light rippled across their surfaces in perfect harmony. It was like watching the aurora of a dozen different worlds all dancing together in the darkness of space. "By the ancient gods!" gasped the sensor operator. "Admiral, those aren't weapon systems activating. Those are light displays. Decorative light displays." The alien crews throughout the fleet stared in complete confusion as the supposedly terrifying death ships began to pulse and glow with colors that painted the entire star system in rainbow hues. The lights moved in perfect synchronization, creating patterns that were not just beautiful, but somehow deeply mesmerizing. And then the music started. It began as a low, rhythmic pulse that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The sound waves traveled through space using some kind of technology that nobody in the galactic fleet had ever encountered before. It wasn't harsh or threatening like the war cries that most civilizations use in battle. Instead, it was smooth and flowing, with a beat that seemed to reach right into your chest and make your heart want to follow along. "What is that sound?" Zethrak asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is it some kind of sonic weapon?" But even as he asked the question, he found himself listening more carefully. The music was unlike anything he had ever heard. It had layers and textures that seemed to wrap around his mind like a warm blanket. There were instruments that created melodies so beautiful they made his eyes water, and rhythms that made his feet want to move without his permission. The human ships began to dance. There was no other way to describe what was happening. These massive vessels, each one the size of a small city, started spinning and twirling through space with a grace that defied every law of physics Zethrak thought he understood. They moved in perfect time with the music, creating formations that flowed and changed like living art. "Admiral," his communications officer called out, his voice cracking with disbelief. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the enemy fleet. But this is impossible. It's being broadcast in over 40 different languages simultaneously. They're speaking to every species in our armada in their native tongue." "Put it through the speakers," Zethrak ordered, though his voice sounded strange and distant even to his own ears. He couldn't take his eyes off the incredible display unfolding in front of them. The voice that filled the bridge was warm and friendly, completely unlike anything they had expected from the galaxy's most feared species. It spoke with genuine excitement and joy, like someone greeting old friends at a party. "Greetings, fellow beings of the galaxy. Welcome to humanity's first ever intergalactic music festival. We've been trying to reach civilizations across the stars for months now, sending out invitations to join us in our celebration of universal harmony and good vibes." The bridge fell completely silent except for the continuing music, which had now grown into a full orchestral piece that included sounds and instruments from what seemed like hundreds of different worlds. Zethrak felt his mandibles, which had been clicking nervously with fear just moments before, slowly relaxing. "We know this might seem a little unusual," the cheerful human voice continued, "but we believe that music is a universal language that can bring all intelligent species together. We prepare performances featuring musical styles from Earth, along with fusion pieces that incorporate artistic elements we've learned from other civilizations we've met." As if to demonstrate their point, the human ships began an even more elaborate dance routine. Some of the vessels spun in tight spirals, while others performed wide, sweeping arcs through space. Fireworks erupted between them, actual fireworks that somehow burned and sparkled in the vacuum of space, creating brilliant explosions of color that lit up the darkness for millions of miles in every direction. "The light shows you're seeing are part of our opening ceremony," the transmission continued. "We've developed new holographic technology specifically for this festival, designed to create immersive artistic experiences that can be enjoyed by beings with all different types of vision and sensory perception." Zethrak found himself staring in amazement as one of his feet began tapping against the metal floor of the bridge in time with the music. Around him, his crew members were having similar reactions. The Matherian blob creatures were changing colors in rhythm with the beat, while the insect-like klaxons were clicking their mandibles in musical patterns. The music swelled to an incredible crescendo, and the human ships formed a perfect spiral galaxy formation, their lights creating the illusion of stars being born and dying in fast motion. It was the most beautiful thing Zethrak had ever seen in his long military career. "So what do you say?" the human voice asked with obvious hope and excitement. "Ready to experience the greatest cultural exchange event in galactic history? Let's make some music together." The bridge of the Galactic Defender had never been so quiet. Admiral Zethrak stood completely still, his mouth hanging open as his brain tried to process what he was seeing and hearing around him. His crew members looked like statues frozen in time, their weapons forgotten as the incredible truth slowly sank in. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few seconds. Then, like pieces of a massive puzzle falling into place, everything began to make perfect sense in the most shocking way possible. Hello there," came a bright, cheerful voice over the communication system. It belonged to Captain Lucy Henderson, who was speaking from one of the human ships. Her tone was so friendly and casual that it made Zethrak feel like he was talking to a neighbor over a backyard fence rather than the commander of an alien fleet. "Sorry about all confusion, folks. We've been having such an absolutely amazing time with the other civilizations we visited that we might have gotten just a tiny bit carried away with our tour schedule." Zethrak's intelligence officer, a pale green creature named Kexlar who had spent years studying the disappearances, suddenly went even more pale. His voice came out as barely a whisper, filled with a mixture of disbelief and dawning understanding. "Admiral, the missing civilizations, the 12 worlds that went dark, they weren't destroyed by these beings. They were—" He paused, struggling to find the right words for something so impossible. "They were entertained to death." Before Zethrak could respond, another human voice jumped into the conversation with the enthusiasm of someone at a party who had just been asked about their favorite hobby. "Oh man, you bet they were." This was Commander Dave Park, whose excitement practically bounced through the speakers. The folks on Kepler 7 were supposed to be a 3-day cultural exchange, but they loved our jazz music so much they begged us to stay for 3 extra weeks. And don't even get me started on Andorian colonies. Those guys have been requesting encore performances every single night for the past month. Zethrak felt his legs getting weak. He reached out and grabbed the nearest chair, slowly sitting down as the full picture became clear. All around him, his crew members were having similar reactions. Some were laughing in disbelief, others were shaking their heads in amazement, and a few looked like they wanted to crawl under their control panels and hide. "Wait," Zethrak said, his voice getting stronger as his military training kicked in. "Are you telling me that every civilization that went silent, they're all just having parties?" "Not just parties," came another voice, this one belonging to Lieutenant Ben Walsh, who handled public relations for the human fleet. "Full-scale cultural festivals. The Matherian Empire asked us to teach them how to play human instruments. The Crystal people learned to break dance, and let me tell you, watching it being made of living rock through the robot is something you never forget." The tactical display in front of Zethrak, which had been showing what his analysts thought were weapons of mass destruction, suddenly made perfect sense. Those weren't warships at all. They were concert halls floating through space, mobile entertainment centers designed to bring music and art to civilizations across a galaxy. "The dark hulls," Zethrak said slowly, pointing at the screen. "We thought they were some kind of stealth technology designed to absorb sensor scans and hide your true capabilities." "Oh, that," came the delighted voice of Chief Engineer Amy Rodriguez. "Those are our state-of-the-art concert lighting systems. We spent 2 years developing that technology. See, the hulls absorb all the ambient light from nearby stars and then redirect it through our holographic projection systems. It creates the perfect dark canvas for our light shows." She paused for a moment, and Zethrak could hear the pride in her voice as she continued. "We can project 3-dimensional images that are visible from millions of miles away. Last week we created a holographic dragon that was so realistic, the Draconian Empire thought one of their ancient gods had returned to life." Admiral Jake Morrison's voice joined the conversation, and Zethrak could hear the genuine happiness in his tone. "Admiral Zethrak, I have to say, the response we've gotten from every species we met has been absolutely incredible. We originally planned this as a 6-month tour to introduce human culture to the galaxy, but honestly, we've been so welcomed everywhere we go that we're now booked solid for the next 2 years. 2 years. Gas Commander Thylex, Zethrak's second in command. You mean you've been planning to visit every civilization in the galaxy? Well, not every one, came the modest reply from Captain Henderson. Just the ones that responded to our invitations. We sent out broadcasts in over 300 languages about 6 months ago, inviting anyone who was interested to attend our festivals or request a visit to their home systems. Zethrak's communications officer suddenly looked up from his console with wide eyes. Admiral, I'm finding those broadcasts in our archived messages. They came in on the general cultural exchange frequency. We automatically filtered them as low priority and never looked at them. The realization hit Zethrak like a physical blow. While his military intelligence had been tracking these humans as a galaxy-threatening force, the truth was that they had been politely sending party invitations that nobody had bothered to read. The technological suppression, Zethrak said, still trying to wrap his mind around everything. Our sensors show that you could shut down entire fleets without firing a shot. Oh, that's just feedback from our sound systems, explained Chief Engineer Rodriguez with a laugh. When we really crank up the volume for our big finale numbers, the acoustic energy can temporarily overload sensitive electronic equipment. We've been working on dampening fields to prevent that, but most species actually like the effect. They say it makes them feel like they're inside the music. Admiral Morrison's voice became more serious for a moment. We're really sorry about the misunderstanding, Admiral. We had no idea we were causing panic across the galaxy. We've just been following our tour schedule, visiting civilizations that invited us, and trying to share human culture through music and art. Zethrak looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. These battle-hardened veterans who had prepared for the fight of their lives were now grinning like children at a carnival. The music was still playing in the background, and he noticed that several of his officers were unconsciously swaying to the rhythm. So, Zethrak said slowly, the greatest threat to galactic civilization is actually a traveling music show? The greatest party in galactic history, corrected Commander Park with infectious enthusiasm. And you're all invited to be our guests of honor. 6 months had passed since the great misunderstanding, and Chancellor Vextheri sat in his crystal office, staring at reports that made his head spin with confusion. The emergency council session he had called wasn't about alien invasions or galactic warfare. No, this crisis was something far more bizarre and, frankly, embarrassing than anything he'd dealt with in his 2 centuries of leadership. The massive Galactic Council chamber buzzed with worried conversations as representatives from dozens of star systems gathered to discuss what everyone was calling the human problem. But this wasn't the kind of problem that could be solved with weapons or military strategy. This was something entirely new in galactic history. Chancellor. His chief aide began, reading from a digital tablet that seemed to grow heavier with each report. The situation is getting worse by the day. The Rigelian Trade Confederation has reported a 40% drop in manufacturing output across all their industrial worlds. Vextheri leaned forward, his crystalline features reflecting the worry that had been building for months. 40%? That's catastrophic for the galactic economy. What's causing the slowdown? His aide's expression was a mixture of disbelief and frustration. Sir, their workers keep calling in sick to attend something the humans call karaoke nights. Apparently, it's an activity where beings stand up in front of crowds and sing popular songs while others cheer them on. Singing? Vextheri asked incredulously. They're abandoning their jobs to sing? Before his aide could respond, another official stood up from across the chamber. This was Ambassador Corps from the Centauri Diplomatic Corps, one of the most serious and professional organizations in the galaxy. His usually pristine uniform looked rumpled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. Chancellor, the Centauri situation is even worse, Ambassador Corps announced with the tone of someone admitting to a shameful secret. Our diplomatic corps hasn't filed a single treaty or trade agreement in 3 months. Our most experienced negotiators, beings who have spent decades mastering the art of interplanetary politics, are completely obsessed with something humans call fantasy football. Fantasy football? Vextheri repeated, his voice rising in pitch. "Is that some kind of combat sport?" "No, sir," Ambassador Korth replied, looking embarrassed. "It's a game where you pretend to manage imaginary teams of athletes from Earth. You compete against other beings to see whose pretend team performs better. My entire staff spends hours every day debating the merits of something called a quarterback and arguing about draft picks." Admiral Karoff, the legendary military strategist who had helped organize the original response to the human threat, stood up slowly. His 6 eyes looked tired, and his usually perfect military posture had slumped with defeat. "Chancellor, what happened to the vegan colonies is beyond anything we could have predicted," he said with the voice of a general reporting a devastating military loss. "Half of their planetary government has completely shut down. Their ministers, senators, and even their Supreme Council members have abandoned their posts to participate in something humans call a dance-off." "A dance-off?" Vex Theory asked, though at this point he was almost afraid to hear the answer. "It's exactly what it sounds like, sir," Admiral Karoff continued with visible pain in his voice. "Groups of beings compete against each other by performing rhythmic body movements to music. The vegan leadership has been dancing nonstop for 6 weeks now. They've set up stages in their Capitol building and are broadcasting their performances across their entire planet." Vex Theory stood up and walked to the massive view screen that dominated one wall of the council chamber. What he saw outside made his crystal structure flicker with a mixture of amazement and horror. Floating in space near the Galactic Capital was a human's latest creation, a massive orbital entertainment complex that Captain Mike Thompson had somehow convinced 6 different species to help design and build. The station was the size of a small moon and pulsed with music and light 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The structure was unlike anything ever built in galactic history. Part concert hall, part sports arena, part social club. It drew visitors from across the galaxy like a magnet. Ships from hundreds of different worlds could be seen docked at its numerous ports, and a constant stream of traffic made it look like the busiest spaceport in the universe. "Sir," called his communications officer from across the chamber, her voice cutting through his thoughts. "We're receiving another transmission from the humans. They're announcing their next event." "What is it this time?" Vex Theory asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer would make his situation even worse. "They're calling it Intergalactic Comedy Night, sir. Apparently, it's an event where beings tell humorous stories and jokes to make others laugh. And..." She paused, looking at her screen with growing alarm. "Oh no! They're offering free tickets to all government officials across the galaxy." As if summoned by her words, the cheerful voice of Admiral Jake Morrison filled the council chamber through the communication system. His tone was as friendly and enthusiastic as ever, completely oblivious to the chaos his species was causing. "Greetings, leaders of the Galactic Council. We're incredibly excited to announce our next cultural exchange event. Comedy Night will feature stand-up performers from Earth alongside talented comedians we discovered from dozens of other worlds. We've learned that laughter truly is universal." The transmission continued with details about the event, but Vex Theory found himself barely listening to the words. Instead, he was focusing on the sound of genuine laughter in the background, the kind of joy and happiness that he realized he hadn't heard in the usually serious halls of galactic government in decades. Despite his best efforts to remain professional and concerned about the productivity crisis, Vex Theory felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Curiosity. What was this comedy that had captured the imagination of so many civilizations? What made beings laugh so hard that they forgot about their jobs and responsibilities? Around the chamber, he could see similar expressions on the faces of his fellow council members. Beings who had spent their entire careers focused on serious matters of state were unconsciously leaning forward, interested in spite of themselves. "Chancellor," Admiral Karoff said quietly, "perhaps we should investigate this phenomenon firsthand. For diplomatic purposes, of course, to better understand the scope of this cultural influence. For the good of the galaxy," Ambassador Korth added, nodding sagely. "We need to comprehend what we're dealing with." Vex Theory looked around the chamber at faces that had spent months discussing humanity as a threat to galactic stability. Now those same faces showed something he never would have expected: excitement "I suppose," he said slowly, trying to maintain his official dignity, even as his crystalline form began to glow with anticipation, "we should investigate this threat personally, for research purposes only, you understand." Within an hour, the Galactic Council chambers were completely empty for the first time in over a century. The galaxy's most serious leaders were all heading to comedy night, ready to discover what made humans the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Not because they could destroy civilizations, but because they could make them forget everything else existed. Resistance, it seemed, was not only futile but completely undesirable.